So you thought learning VBA would be like this, but instead it's turning out to be something like this. That could be because you're going about it wrong. Hello, my name is Jeremy. Welcome to GOAT, greatest office tutorial ever, and today we're going to start learning Excel VBA. Now we're going to go about it a little bit differently. Typically, when people learn VBA, they focused very much on the syntax side of the language. The syntax side of the language is where you talk about variables, constants, how to do loops, etc. I would argue that's the easier part of the language, and we can learn that later. The essential part, which we have to focus on, is the Office object model. That is how you get VBA to talk to your various applications, be it Excel, Access, PowerPoint, Word, etc. So today we're going to start learning the Office model because it can be very intimidating if you've never approached it before. By the end of this lesson, we'll have written some code that we can use in any Excel worksheet. And even if you're an Access fan, stay tuned because this will also help you when you start coding for Excel. If what you find is useful today, do me a favor, please consider subscribing, liking the video, and if you have any comments, post them down below. I do reply to comments and I monitor them. Thank you so much. The first thing you'll need to do after you enter Excel is, if you have not already, you will need to activate the developer option for your ribbon, and that is very easy to do. You just simply go to File, Options, Customize Ribbon, and then down on the main tab section you will have a developer. Ensure that is checked and hit OK. And now we have some great opportunity to start coding. Now, after we have enabled VBA, we want to go ahead and save this file, and we want to do Save As because we need to save it as an Excel macro-enabled workbook, and now we have a macro-enabled workbook. Now, before we start coding, we have to take a look at Excel. You may think this is very easy. Oh, I just have rows and columns, but there is actually a lot more behind the scenes than you realize, and that is probably what confuses a lot of people. So here is just a peek of what is going on behind the scenes. This is by no means complete, and it looks very scary, but don't worry, we're going to walk through this and you'll start to understand how this works. And then we're going to start using VBA and code to be able to talk to these various parts of Excel. To get to the Visual Basic, we click here, and now we are in the Visual Basic environment. We can go to the top left, Module, and now we have a blank module with no code in it. To begin coding, let's do something like code a way to automatically give us a table of contents of every sheet in our workbook. So we're going to do public sub TOC. Public means anywhere in this Excel workbook we'll be able to see this code, and we're going to need a variable because we're going to have to talk to this workbook object. So we're going to dim WB as workbook, and then we're going to use the set command to set the workbook equal to the first workbook in the workbooks, there we go, which is the only workbook we have open right now. Let's go ahead and save our project. Now, what can we do with a workbook object? Well, we can run the save command and we can run the save as command, so let's try that now. We do wb.save. You'll see some little helper drop-down options. We just run that. There are no arguments or anything after it, and it will just save the file. And let's do this at the end. At the end of our code, we always want to, anytime we set something, we want to set it equal to nothing just to be sure. And then we're going to debug.print code finished. Now debug.print is where we can have the code out here. And we can do all kinds of things in the immediate window. So if we do question mark down here is a shortcut for debug.print. 2 plus 21 equals 23. That's the same as debug.print 2 plus 21, 23. We can also run our module here. So if we can execute this TOC module, we'll run TOC. It just saved our workbook and it said code finished. Now, let's do something a little more complex. Now we're going to run the save as method to this workbook object as. Now you have all these other options come up on the save as. However, notice they're in brackets, which means they're optional. Now, how do we confirm that they're optional? Well, let's look at our object model. Save as. Here are the parameters, or sometimes arguments. Everything is optional here, and they describe what they allow you to do. So we're just going to run save, and then we're going to run save as. Actually, let's get rid of save as. So we've set our variable to a workbook, and then we're just going to run save as, and let's see what happens. There we go. Do you want to replace it? Jeremy, how do we do stuff inside the worksheet? Well, I'm getting to that, so let's do this and move on. Now you will notice that within a workbook object is a collection of worksheets. Now that's how we get to these guys over here. Each sheet you make is a worksheet. So right now you can see we have 3 sheets, 1, 2, 3. Those are items inside the collection of worksheets. So this is going to be a little weird, but check it out. Okay, now let's get rid of our save as for now. And notice that since worksheets are a collection of objects, so instead of one, it could be many objects. We're going to need another variable, dim ws as worksheet. How do you think we set that to be the first worksheet in a collection of worksheets? Set ws equals, remember, we have our workbook already here, dot worksheets 1. Oh, I know this looks a little weird, but trust me. Now let's clear up our text. Now what can we do? Well, we can do several things. Since we have a worksheet object, now we're actually talking about the first worksheet in our collection of worksheets, which would be it starts from the left and goes right. 1, 2, 3. So to prove that, I'm going to rename this worksheet to GOTE, G-O-T-E. Now, if we go over to the worksheet, I don't have that property, but one of the properties is .name, worksheet.name. I don't have it here, but let's see if we can look at the name of our worksheet. So now that we have a worksheet variable, we can type debug.print ws.name. And what do you think will appear at the bottom when we run it? GOAT. And then code finish. Now let's name some of these other things. I'm going to name all 3 of my sheets. Now, how would we list the names of all of the worksheets in our workbook? Well, we could do something like this. Set ws equals yada, 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 then you debug. Then you could say set ws equals wb.worksheets2. Then you could do it again, a debug, but that's very inefficient. It would work, but it's very inefficient. So what are some options? Well, we could do something like this. We could not set the variable at all and just refer to it directly using what we did before. So debug.print wb.worksheets1.name. Now, if you'll notice, this will return a worksheet object. We don't have it as a variable anywhere, but it's kind of the same thing. So we could do this. Now, what do you think will happen when we run this? Well, let's try it out. TOC. There we go. In our immediate window, GOAT, other stuff, tutorial. But you can tell this would be very laborious if we had multiple worksheets, so there's got to be a better way. And there is. We need a loop. So I'm going to come up top and dim I as long. Long means long integer. There's a couple of ways to do this. You could do dim I as long, or what I prefer, dim I ampersand right after it, no space. Just think of it as, wow, that's a long character to draw. An I is a long. So it's just a big number. How do I loop through all the worksheets in my collection? Well, how about we do this? We could do it very explicitly. For I equals 1, 2, 3. Debug.print wb.worksheets. Refer to the I because now that variable is sitting there in the place of 1, 2, or 3. Name. And then we do a next I. So now we don't need all this good stuff. Let's get rid of it. Now let's review. We have a workbook and a worksheet. Although we're not really using this variable, it's okay if we don't have it in there. And we have an I, which is a long. So I've set my workbook variable equal to workbooks 1. And for I equals 1 to 3, so it's going to go 1, 2, 3, I'm going to debug.print, so down here, workbook.worksheets, referring to the first sheet, which is I, .name. And when we run the code, there we have it. We looped through. Now, you may have the question, what if I don't know how many worksheets are in my Excel? It could be 30. Do I have to count each time? No, you do not. So for now, I'm going to get rid of our loop here. And we're going to go back to setting that worksheet variable. There. Now we have a variable set to the first worksheet. We want to work with this first worksheet here. Now what I could do is do something like this. ws.cells, row index, column index. So row is up and down, 1, 1 equals go. Now what do you think will happen if I run this? Oh, and remember, since we've set a WS, let's go ahead and set WS equals nothing at the end of our code, just for proper housekeeping. Now, what do you think will happen when I run TOC? Check it out. We now have GOAT appearing here. Now, earlier we just did a loop. So how do you think we would loop through all the sheets of this Excel and type those items here? Let's use, we still have our I variable, so for I equals 1 to workbook.worksheets.count. So this is going to get all of the worksheets in our workbook from 1 to whatever that number is, 10, 5, 3, or just 1. Here's what we're going to do. Now, we want to go down our list. Now, worksheet is talking about just the first worksheet. So we're looping through here, but we've still got this variable set to just the first worksheet because we don't want to write code or write text anywhere else. So how are we going to do this? So I need to loop through and get the name of each worksheet. So here's one way to do it. I'm going to say worksheet.cells. Now remember, these are referring to the row and the column. So we're going to stay in column 1, but instead of 1, let's change that to I. Worksheet.cells I 1 1 equals, and what are we talking about? We're talking about the workbook.worksheets I. So now we're referring to an individual object in the worksheet, in the worksheets collection, 1, 2, 3. So .name. Now, do you think this will work? I think it will work, but let's try it. Let's run the code. And now, look at what we have. This loop went from 1 to the worksheets count of our workbook. And what it did is it set the worksheet.cells I1. So the first run of the loop was 1. So cells 1, 1 equal to wb.worksheetsI.name. So within our collection of worksheets in our workbook, worksheet1.name, which was GOAT. Then it went to the next I, so it added +1 to the I. So now we're at 2. So replace, anytime you see I, replace it with 2. Worksheet.cells2 1, which cells is a little weird. You're used to probably seeing A1 when you use formula. Well, it works in reverse in VBA for when you use cells. So you could do cells I, which I think of it as Y and X. So I is your row, 1 is your column. So now we're at coordinates 2, 1. So worksheet cells 2, 1 equals workbook.worksheets2.name. Well, what's the second worksheet in our collection? 4. And there we have it, sheet 4. And so it goes all the way from 1 to how many worksheets do we have down here? Yes, we have 5. Pretty cool, huh? But we're just getting started. So this is all well and good, but boy, I wish this font was larger. How do we increase the size of this font? Well, there's a couple of ways to do it. You'll notice that anytime we call several of these properties, we get the range object. Now the range object is going to have lots of things we can do to a range object. Here are just some of the things. So this is a range object. You can look at the font. Ooh, look at this. This is neat. You can do border around. Okay, so let's play with some of the stuff. Let's play with a range font and see what we can do with it. Now we have to remember that when we run the cells property, we are given a range object. And that range object has a .font property, which is given a font object, and that font object has multiple properties under it. One of them, let's check our object model. There we go, range object. Now let's not get confused between range and ranges. Remember, that's a collection, but we're talking about the object itself. What properties do we have? And you see there are a bunch for range, but one of them is going to be called font. Now if we click font, returns a font object. So again, that's why I have the green arrows here with this gray thing. So when I talk to range.font, I'm going to get a font object, and it's going to have its own properties. So let's come back over here, and let's look at what a font object has. And let's look at properties. Oh, here we are. We have size, name, font style, etc. So let's play around with this. What if, when I'm going through my loop, I want my font sizes to also be larger? How would I do it? Well, one way to do it, since we know cells returns a font object, why don't we just do ws.cells? Let's refer to the same thing we did before. Now we have the .font property. So let's look at the .font property. Then we have one of them will be bold and one of them size I don't have on the slide. .size equals, let's make it large. What do you think is going to happen when I run this code? Well, let's try it. There we have it. As before, we loop through from 1 to the count of all the worksheets in the workbook. As we're looping through this variable, we set the cell I, 1 equal to that worksheet name. Then we set the cell I, 1 font size equals 20. Let's play with one more. Worksheet.cells I, 1 font bold equal true. I think that'll work. Let's see. If I'm unsure, I can check that property. Let's go to bold, font.bold property, true if the font is bold. Okay, cool. So that is true. It's expecting a true or false. Let's run TOC. And now we've bolded them. Now you'll notice we're starting to type ws.cells over and over and over. So is there an easier way to do this? Why, yes, there is. VBA has this thing called with. And so you can say with ws.cells I, 1. One of the ways, now what happens is when you do the with, it prefixes all of the stuff. So for instance, if I were to say with wb.worksheets, I would only have to type .count. So now I can do something like this. With ws cells I, 1 .value, which is the default property if you don't annotate stuff, is that. Then we can do delete this, .font size equals 20, .font bold equals true. And then we have to end the with. You have to close it up or you'll get an error. Now, let's review the code again. We have a workbook variable. Then we have a specific worksheet variable, which is worksheet 1, because that's where we're making this list of things. So now we're going to start a loop from 1 to the count of how many worksheets we have. So it's going to grab this first one and go until it hits the end. And then we say, okay, now let's do a with so I can save some typing with the worksheet. So talking about worksheet 1, cells I, comma 1. Now I don't have to keep typing ws.cells1 dot value equals this, ws.cells1 blah blah dot font equals this. I basically said, okay, this is my prefix for the next every time I type a period. And so let's run the code and see what happens. Let's clear this out just to prove that it's working. Now let's run this code. There we have it, folks. Pretty cool. Now, if you're getting confused, here's kind of another way to look at it. Here's the workbook variable we have. It is an object. Within the workbook object is a collection called worksheets with the S. Within that collection, one or more, actually, I guess it could be 0, but in our example, we have multiple worksheet objects within the collection of worksheets. And to talk about any one of these worksheets specifically, we could do worksheets, parentheses, what number of sheet we're talking about. And that's what we're doing here in code. We've set our ones we're working with to give our list as worksheet 1, the first one. And then we're looping through all the worksheets. We don't have to set the variable. We can say from I, worksheet cells, we can refer to that same, the current worksheet, using that right there, worksheets I. So that way we can talk about other worksheets and still reference this worksheet variable, which is 1, number 1. We don't have to do that. We could do something like this. Let's say we didn't set this variable. How would you do the code if you did not set that variable? Let's comment that out. Instead of that, we could type something like this: workbook.worksheets 1.cells. This will work the same as before, but you'll notice the code starts to get very busy, which is why sometimes we set our short variables. So now, if I run this code, it will run the same exact way. So again, instead of setting a variable, I just referenced it directly, but that starts to get really messy. So it really helps sometimes to set a variable. Just remember to set that variable to nothing at the end of your code. And now, instead of all that good stuff, we know that WS equals that. So folks, we are approaching the finish line for this first lesson. How do we do hyperlinks? Well, there is a collection of hyperlinks within each worksheet. So how are we going to get to it? Well, we want to put the hyperlink on worksheet 1. So worksheet.hyperlinks. Okay, so we know we're getting somewhere. If you look at the object model, one of the methods, things we can do for a hyperlinks object is add. Now, the help isn't the best for this, so sometimes you may have to Google. They do have some examples, but they're not very good. So let's go through this, and we're going to see how this works. So worksheet.hyperlinks.add. There we go. We have the little movement icon, meaning, okay, we're on the right path. So anchor as object. What that means is, where is the link going to be in your worksheet? So since we're going through this worksheet and we write the name of whatever worksheet we're in the loop, we want that link on that cell. So to get that cell, here we are, ws.cells. We're just going to refer to the current cell or range that we're looking at. All right, cool. Now what? Comma, now it's expecting an address. Now, it doesn't say very clearly on the Office help, so that's why Google's your friend, but the address is for external locations. So we have to, unfortunately, do address equals and just give it 2 double quotes. We're not going anywhere external. Now, subaddress is what we're looking for, which is, for some reason, not highlighting up. It's this guy right here. So subaddress equals. Now then, we want to refer to a place in our worksheet. How are we going to do that? So the name of the worksheet, well, how do we get the name of the worksheet? Oh, here we go, workbook.worksheets I.name, and then bang, A1. Now, it's expecting a string for this parameter here. So do you think it will work? Oh, we have an error. Oh, I have a period here. I should have a comma. There we go. All right. So do you think if I run this code, we're going to get our hyperlinks? Well, let's find out. Here we are. Let's run the code. Code finished. Let's go to our sheet 1. Oh, cool. Test it out. I can hit Alt left to go back. Test tutorial, Alt left, other stuff. Uh-oh. Reference invalid. Notice how it has a single quote around that name. So we need to do a single quote when we add a hyperlink. So how do we do that? Well, equals, I'm going to do double quote, single quote, double quote. And the single quote is around just the name. Right here after this double quote, I'm going to add another single quote. Now, this will not hurt you if your tab does not have a space in the name. Let's run the code. Now, it works. Alt left arrow. Now then, I think that's enough for today. Future courses will dive more into VBA, but hopefully you're getting an idea of how this object model works. I know it's confusing, but just play around with it, preferably on a brand new file. Don't do something that's very important in case you mess up the code, but just use the object model that Microsoft provides. Here's kind of, if you want to take a screenshot of this, and kind of just mentally think about where you're at. There are multiple ways to do this. This is one way to do it. There's kind of multiple ways to reference these guys. Thanks so much for watching. Have a great day.